At the family party, my sister stood up, raised her glass, and shouted, "Now I'm the owner of that house, get out." Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. The night had started out like any other family gathering. Balloons and streamers hung crookedly across the ceiling of the old living room, the same house I'd grown up in. My mom's birthday cake sat untouched on the table, the smell of chocolate and candle wax filling the air. Laughter and chatter echoed as cousins, uncles, and aunts filled every corner. I'd spent the whole day making sure everything was perfect, because this wasn't just any house, it was home. My home. I was standing by the kitchen doorway when Kara, my older sister, clinked her wine glass against a fork. The chatter died down. She wore that polished smile she always had when she wanted attention, her hair perfect, her dress expensive looking. Everyone turned, expecting some sentimental toast for Mom. But instead, she leaned back, raised her chin, and announced, "I have something important to share. As of last week, I am now the sole owner of this house." The room froze. My stomach twisted. For a moment I thought I misheard her, but she didn't stop there. She looked straight at me, her voice sharp as glass. "Which means, Lila, you need to start packing. You don't belong here anymore." The words slammed into me like a punch. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us, but no one spoke up. I felt the blood rush to my face, my chest tightening as if I couldn't breathe. All those nights I stayed up taking care of Mom when she was sick, all the times I turned down trips and jobs just so I could keep this place running, it meant nothing to her. I tried to speak, my voice cracking. "What are you talking about, Kara? This house, Mom wanted both of us to have it. You know that." But she only smirked, raising her glass higher. "Guess I was smart enough to handle the paperwork. You weren't. That's life." She sipped her wine like it was the easiest thing in the world, while my world fell apart in front of everyone. My hands shook, and I felt fury rise beneath the shock. I scanned the room, desperate for anyone to defend me. But silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Kara had turned a celebration of Mom's life into my public humiliation. And in that moment, betrayal settled deep in my bones. I lay awake that night staring at the faded ceiling, the sound of muffled voices from the party still echoing in my ears. Memories of my parents came flooding back, uninvited but sharp as knives. I could still see Mom at the kitchen table, sipping her tea, saying over and over again that the house was meant for both of us. She never said it in legal terms, never drew lines in contracts, but the way she spoke left no doubt. It was supposed to be shared. A place for family, for both her daughters to hold on to. I thought about the long years after Dad passed, when Mom's health started to slip. The house became a weight and a refuge all at once. I was the one who learned her medication schedule, who fixed the leaky roof when money was tight, who kept the lights on even when my own life was unraveling. My world shrank to these walls, but I accepted it because she needed me. Kara, on the other hand, floated in and out like a guest. Quick visits on holidays, flashy stories about new jobs and new cities. She always had an excuse for why she couldn't stay, why she couldn't pitch in. I never pressed her. I thought one day she'd understand the responsibility I carried. Now, replaying her announcement at the party, I couldn't help asking myself the same question over and over. How had she managed to strip me out of what was promised? No one ever mentioned paperwork changing hands, no calls from lawyers, nothing. It was as if the rug had been pulled out from under me without a single warning. Then another memory came creeping in, Uncle Dean, sitting at the dining table after Mom's funeral, shuffling through papers with a stern look. He'd been the executor of the estate, the one trusted to handle everything. I remembered how quickly he brushed me off when I asked what needed to be signed. "Don't worry, I'll handle it," he had said, his tone so firm that I didn't question it. Now it all felt different, like a puzzle snapping into place in the ugliest way. Kara didn't suddenly own anything, she had help. And Dean, with his habit of cutting corners and playing favorites, was the only person who could have given it to her. The more I thought about it, the more my suspicion hardened into certainty. Something had been twisted behind closed doors, and I'd been left in the dark. The guests had left, the dishes stacked in the sink, and the house felt heavier than ever. I found Kara on the back porch, leaning against the railing with another glass of wine. The night air was cool, but her expression carried no warmth. I stepped closer, my voice unsteady but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "How did you do it? How did the house end up in only your name?" She turned slowly, eyes gleaming with amusement, as if she'd been waiting for me to ask. Simple, she said, tilting her glass. I was smarter. While you were busy playing nurse, I was taking care of business. You think love and loyalty matter? Paperwork does. Her laugh was light, but it burned in my ears. I pressed her, demanding to know who helped her. That's when she let it slip, almost proudly, that Uncle Dean had been the one to file everything, guiding her through each step while I was too distracted to notice. He knew how to get things moving quickly, she said, shrugging as if it was nothing more than a shopping trip. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. Every sacrifice, every late night watching over Mom, every ounce of energy I had poured into keeping this place alive, it had all been used against me. My chest tightened as the reality settled in. I wasn't just overlooked. I was betrayed by the very people who should have stood beside me. Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. My voice cracked as I whispered, I gave everything, Kara. Everything. But she didn't soften. She looked at me the way someone might glance at a stranger in line, indifferent, detached. That's life, she said flatly, draining the rest of her drink before setting the empty glass down. Her words echoed in my head, cruel and final. I turned away before she could see the way my body shook, rage and grief twisting inside me like a storm. In that moment, I knew she'd taken more than the house. She had stolen years of my life and tossed them aside like they meant nothing. As I stood in the dark hallway later, staring at the family photos lining the wall, one thought burned so fiercely it drowned out the ache. She would not win. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I would find a way to make her regret every single thing she had done. 3 days after the party, a sharp knock rattled the front door. I opened it to see Kara standing there, her heels clicking against the porch, an envelope in her hand. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She shoved the paper toward me and said coolly, 30 days. That's the law. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Her voice carried no hesitation, no hint of sisterhood. Just business. I unfolded the notice, the official stamp glaring back at me. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. You really went this far? I asked. Kara only shrugged, already turning to leave. A deadline's a deadline. The sound of her car door slamming echoed long after she drove away. Word spread quickly. Calls trickled in from relatives, some offering half-hearted sympathy, others skirting around the subject as if silence would keep them safe from the ugliness. A few said they wished things were different, but none of them dared confront Kara directly. Their caution cut deeper than her cruelty. It felt like abandonment stacked on betrayal. Nights became unbearable. I started dragging boxes into my old bedroom at the back of the house, the same place I used to tape posters on the wall as a teenager. Now it looked like a storage unit, half filled with my life packed away in cardboard. I'd lie on the narrow bed, staring at piles of belongings, every creak in the house reminding me of the countdown that had already begun. In the middle of all that, Joel showed up. My cousin had always been quiet at gatherings, but he stepped through the doorway with a determined look I hadn't seen before. He glanced at the boxes, then at me. Don't give her the victory she wants, he said firmly. You still have options. She doesn't get to erase you. His words didn't erase the ache in my chest, but they steadied me in a way nothing else had. I nodded, swallowing hard. For the first time since the party, a flicker of strength stirred inside me. Maybe it was small, fragile even, but it was something. And it was enough to remind me I wasn't completely alone, no matter how many had chosen to stay quiet. Joel showed up one Saturday morning with a determined set to his jaw and a laptop tucked under his arm. We're not just sitting here waiting for the clock to run out, he said. His resolve lit a spark in me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. We piled into his truck and drove to the county clerk's office, the smell of old paper and ink greeting us as we stepped inside. Rows of metal cabinets lined the room, each drawer holding decades of lives etched in legal ink. Together, we sifted through records, page after page, until Joel froze. Here, he whispered, sliding a file toward me. My stomach dropped when I saw the date. The deed had been reassigned only days after Mom's funeral. Too fast. Far too fast. It was as if someone had been waiting, paperwork ready, before the ground had even settled over her grave. I studied the signature scrawled at the bottom. It was supposed to be Mom's, but something about it was off. The slope of the letters, the uneven pressure. My chest tightened. Joel compared it to older documents, placing them side by side. The differences leapt out like cracks in glass. This isn't right, he muttered. The more we read, the clearer it became. Legal jargon twisted around loopholes, terms bent in ways I barely understood. But Joel explained enough for me to grasp the truth. This wasn't an accident. Someone had guided Kara through every step, greasing the wheels where needed, rushing the process so I'd never notice until it was too late. One name appeared again and again in the paperwork, Dean. Executor, witness, signature verifier. He had been at the center of it all, the trusted uncle who had promised to handle everything fairly. My pulse roared in my ears. To think he had sat across from me at the dinner table, talking about family first, while secretly clearing a path for Kara's scheme, it hollowed me out. I leaned back in the hard wooden chair, my hands trembling over the file. Betrayal didn't even feel like a strong enough word. It was theft disguised as duty, cruelty wearing the mask of kinship. My last thread of faith in family ties snapped right there under the harsh fluorescent light. Joel placed a steady hand on my arm. Now you know, he said quietly. And in that instant, grief gave way to something sharper, hotter, and far more dangerous. Revenge began to take shape. I didn't bother knocking. I shoved open Kara's front door with the folder clutched tight in my hands, my heart pounding hard enough to shake my ribs. She was sprawled across the couch, phone in hand, but she didn't even flinch when I stormed in. I tossed the papers onto her coffee table, the pages spilling across the surface like spilled glass. Her eyes flicked down, then back up at me, that same smirk curling at her mouth. Really, Lila? This is what you came with. Some photocopies. She leaned back, crossing her legs. You don't get it. Nothing in there will hold up. Not in court. Not anywhere. Her words sliced through me, but I didn't back down. My voice broke free, louder than I'd ever heard it. I gave everything for Mom. Every ounce of my time, every bit of myself, while you were out chasing whatever you wanted. I lost years, Kara. Years I'll never get back, because I believed we were in this together. My chest heaved as the words poured out, raw and shaking. She tilted her head, almost bored. And I never asked you to. The way she said it, flat, dismissive, knocked the air from my lungs. As if sacrifice meant nothing. As if my devotion had been a foolish choice she'd simply stepped around. The room spun with anger. I wanted to scream, to tear those papers into shreds and hurl them at her smug face. Instead, I stood frozen, staring at the sister I thought I knew, realizing there was nothing behind her eyes but calculation. No guilt, no shame, just cold certainty that she had won. And in that terrible stillness, something shifted inside me. I understood at last that justice wasn't going to come from judges or signatures or tidy resolutions. She had stripped me of home, family, and years of my life. The law wasn't going to give those back. I turned on my heel, pulse roaring in my ears, and walked out of her spotless living room without another word. The decision settled into me as steady as a heartbeat. If Kara was going to feel what she'd done, it wouldn't be through lawyers. It would be through me. I began noticing patterns the way someone might study a map, tiny landmarks that, when connected, reveal a route. Kara loved presentation. Her outfits, her parties, the way she staged conversations to make herself look indispensable. She held dinner gatherings at the house on weekends now, inviting a select few and making sure everyone saw how comfortably she'd settled into the title she'd claimed. I started attending some of those evenings under the guise of visiting, learning what guests said when they thought she wasn't listening, watching who arrived and who left early. Late nights I sat in my car down the block and timed the lights in her hallway, memorized the sound of her laugh, cataloged the brands she trusted, the friends she favored, the old grudges she'd never quite buried. There were weak spots. She hated confrontation, so she smoothed over disputes with flattery. She trusted people who flattered her back. She kept important papers tucked in a thin leather folder in the second drawer of her study desk, the one she always left slightly ajar. Her brother-in-law, Dean, still called her every other week, his voice warm and deferential. She bragged about how effortless it had been to wrap things up after Mother died, but when pressed she gave contradictory timelines and names. Those slips, those small inconsistencies, became the threads I tugged at. Joel didn't approve. "This will eat you alive," he told me one evening, rubbing his temples. He worried about escalation, worried about legal retaliation, worried I'd lose myself in the hunt. I could see his concern, and it knotted something in my chest. But the gulf between what was fair and what had happened to me left no room for complacency. I wasn't looking for sabotage for its own sake. I wanted the truth revealed, for the family to see what had been orchestrated. So I made a list, confirm dates, record conversations, photograph the folders, collect witness statements from peripheral relatives who'd noticed odd timing, and trace financial moves that didn't match Kara's stated sources. Each small task was deliberate, surgical. No drama, no bluster. At night, I battled waves of guilt for scheming. The old Lila who'd chosen caretaking over ambition, whispering that revenge was cruel. Yet another voice, colder, clearer, reminded me that fairness sometimes required force. The tug-of-war inside me sharpened rather than softened my resolve. I intended to strip the sheen off her victory by exposing the mechanism beneath, and I would not let conscience paralyze me into silence. Thanksgiving came with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, but beneath the warmth hung a tension I carried in with me. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. When I stepped through the doorway, the room hushed for a beat before conversation resumed in awkward fragments. Kara sat at the head of the table, pearls at her neck, wine in her hand, presiding like royalty. I placed a thick folder beside the centerpiece. "Before we carve anything," I said evenly, "there's something everyone needs to see." The chatter died instantly. Faces turned toward me, some surprised, others wary. I opened the folder and began laying out the pages one by one. Copies of deeds, signature comparisons, dated correspondence, everything Joel and I had uncovered. At first, no one spoke. The clink of Kara's fork dropping onto her plate broke the silence. Dean's complexion drained as he recognized his name scrawled across key lines. I pointed to mismatched handwriting, highlighted the suspicious timing, read aloud the legal phrasing that had tilted everything in her favor. Each piece of evidence stacked onto the last until the weight of it filled the room. Kara pushed back her chair, rising with a brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous. She's twisting details to make herself look like a victim." Dean just followed procedure. "Everyone does paperwork differently. It doesn't mean anything." Her words tumbled fast, sharp, as though speed could disguise the cracks in her story. But the relatives weren't nodding. Murmurs rose, eyebrows furrowed, heads shook. My aunt whispered that she remembered Mom insisting the house belonged to both daughters. A cousin asked why everything had been filed so quickly after the funeral. Another uncle muttered that he'd noticed Dean avoiding questions about the estate. The tide shifted right there, voices layering against Kara's version. Her confidence faltered. She snapped, "You're all gullible. She's manipulating you." Yet her volume betrayed her fear. The authority she once wielded dissolved under the collective doubt. I watched as her poise cracked, her cheeks reddening, her hands trembling despite the defiance in her tone. For the first time, the spotlight wasn't hers to control. The same relatives who had once turned away from my humiliation now stared at her with suspicion, even disgust. She could no longer laugh off responsibility or dismiss me as naive. In that dining room, surrounded by the family she had tried to impress, Kara tasted the very thing she had forced on me: exposure and disgrace. Dean's troubles came first. Once the documents circulated beyond the dinner table, questions turned into formal complaints. The county clerk's office launched an inquiry, and soon enough, investigators started looking at his role in the estate. What had once been brushed off as routine oversight was now being examined under bright lights and sharp eyes. Whispers spread quickly through the family. He might lose his license, maybe even face charges. Without Dean's shield, Kara's version of events unraveled. Relatives who once tolerated her charm no longer returned her calls. Invitations she expected to receive never arrived. One by one, the people she counted on to bolster her image drifted away, tired of the half-truths and arrogance. The gatherings she hosted at the house grew quieter, the rooms emptier. It wasn't long before she was left with little more than her own echo. For me, life hadn't magically transformed. I still didn't have the deed, still packed away pieces of my life into corners of borrowed space. But the silence that followed the storm carried a strange satisfaction. I could walk into a room now without the sting of pity in people's eyes. They knew the truth. That knowledge alone stitched together parts of me that had been ripped open. Weeks later, I ran into Kara at the grocery store. She leaned on the cart handle, her smile brittle, voice dripping with false sweetness. "Enjoying your little moral victory, Lila? You might have turned people against me, but you're still without a home." The words were sharp, meant to cut. But this time they didn't land. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the triumphant sister from that night at the party, but someone hollowed out, desperate to reclaim control that was gone for good. I held her gaze, steady and unshaken. "Say whatever you want," I replied calmly. "It doesn't change who you are, or what everyone knows now." Her mouth opened, then closed, as though no comeback could bridge the gap between us anymore. I walked past her without another glance, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my steps steady. For the first time in months, her words had no power over me. Joel was the one who found the apartment. It wasn't big, 2 rooms, a creaky staircase, windows that let in the afternoon sun. But when I stepped inside, it felt like possibility instead of loss. Together we carried in boxes, setting them down on the worn wooden floor. It wasn't the house I grew up in, but it was mine, and the air didn't carry the weight of betrayal. As we unpacked, Joel cracked jokes about my endless collection of mugs, and I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Piece by piece, shelves filled, drawers closed, curtains were pulled back. It wasn't grandeur, but it was peace. When he left that evening, I sat cross-legged on the rug, letting the quiet settle around me like a blanket. I thought back to everything that had been taken, the promises broken, the trust shattered. Yet underneath the anger, there was something else, a steadiness I hadn't known before. Losing the house hadn't erased me. If anything, it had shown me the strength to keep standing even when the foundation cracked. Dignity couldn't be signed away on paper. Power didn't live in bricks or land. It lived in the refusal to be silenced. Meanwhile, Kara remained in the old place. I'd heard through relatives that she wandered its hallways alone, bitterness seeping into her days. The house that once felt alive was quiet now, stripped of laughter, stripped of meaning. She had won the deed but lost the people who gave it life. One evening, I drove past. The porch light flickered weakly, and the yard looked unkempt. For a moment, the memories tugged at me, birthdays, late nights with Mom, summers on the porch. But the ache I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt something calmer, like closing a book I'd finally finished. I rolled down the window, looked at the silhouette of the house against the fading sky, and whispered softly, "She may own the walls, but she'll never own the memories." Then I drove on, the road opening wide ahead of me, carrying me toward a future no one else controlled. Do you think I made the right choice walking away from them, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments, I'm curious. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story.